Hey everyone, my name's Stuart. I'm a designer over at PUMA on the global e-commerce team. Excited to be a config. Looking forward to talking about documentation with you.
Hey, I'm Lexa. I'm a product designer here at Formidable, and yeah, happy to be here.
Hello from me, I'm Apostolos. I'm a software engineer, UI specialist, and engineering manager at Formidable Labs. Great to be here.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for coming today. Today we're going to be talking about building a design system using Figma and the Sanity Headless content management system to document it. So the Unified Design System team is a blend between PUMA and our global design and development partner, Formidable. We started this journey a little over 6 months ago with a small team of 3. And over those 6 months, we've since grown to 5. So let's dive in a little bit and talk about the PUMA Unified Design System and our custom documentation site. To give a little bit of context to the problem that we were running into at PUMA, currently there's over 20 different regional e-commerce teams around the globe that end up supporting 50 different countries, which means there's 50 plus different e-commerce experiences that all operate on different platforms. From a design operations and overall experience design perspective, this was a nightmare. Every team internally and externally used a different tool. This produced a ton of design and development debt and created a very fragmented experience for the consumer across all of our digital platforms. Because it was such a fragmented mess, as an organization, we decided to modernize our e-commerce platform by decoupling the front end from the back end. So Sanity, the content management system, allows us to separate the content and experiences from the merchandising databases. That means that we've got one content management system that can power all of the PUMA websites, the shopping app, and the digital in-store experiences. As our team of developers and content authors have been working with Sanity over the last year on the e-com site, they're really familiar with the platform. So it made sense to utilize Sanity to power our documentation site and Figma to build our UI library. And I'll hand it off over to Lexa to talk about a UI library in Figma.
So yeah, the design system was incepted to establish consistency across brand, design, and experience for digital products at PUMA. We're focusing on establishing a coherent experience for the PUMA customer, but also all of the users of the design system, which include designers, developers, content authors, and loads more as well. So we have our core team, but we work with a lot of regional partners and external design and development agencies as well. So we chose tools that can facilitate collaboration and contributions, and that can also grow with us as the design system matures. So Figma gives us the chance to work together with people all over the world. We've got weekly review sessions with designers in Ukraine, India, Boston, Germany, and London. And often we're doing research sessions together in Figjam as well. So we're using branching and a review process for additions and updates and contributions as well. And as Stuart said, Sanity for our documentation site, as we can kind of build a custom solution to fit our use case and cater to our users. So as we're a fairly young design system, our workflow is quite agile, and we're able to work together to experiment, design, develop, and document components. This works for us at the moment as it keeps our component libraries in sync, up to date, and the documentation is a group effort as well. So it gets updated after each edition or change. So while there's a bit of divergence at some points, our workflow is fairly aligned between design and development. When tackling a component or pattern, we'll start off with any research or audits that are needed, and often we'll do a task analysis for the current content author workflow from their legacy platform and identify any pain points and improvements we want to make. From there, we'll design in Figma and develop working prototypes in parallel to experiment and incorporate any technical feedback early and ensure alignment. So then we'll implement almost identical components in both Figma and React. We then test, so we use Chromatic for visual testing, and all the components are also tested for accessibility and bidirectionality for left to right and right to left writing systems. So for the final part of the workflow, we produce the documentation. So that's kind of a vital part of the process, as all the previous work would be made fairly redundant if the components weren't used and implemented as intended. So there's an example of one of our marketing components, both on the .com CMS and in Figma. The marketing components were redesigned to better fit marketing assets and behave more responsibly. These are actually one of the components that the regional teams really struggled with, often having to Photoshop images as the components didn't really fit their need. So we've made the properties consistent between Figma and the .com CMS, as often our designers and content authors are seeing the same components with multiple touch points in the system. And this just kind of makes for a better design and content authoring experience. So along with designing kind of considerate components and patterns for the .com platform, we're trying to make the design system as inclusive and user-friendly as possible, so it's used and contributed to. So we have people in the organization with expertise in a load of different areas, and we want to leverage that for the system. So we've got a UX team, copywriters, art directors, SEO and marketing, and a load more. And by making the system easy to use and contribute to, we kind of hope to bring these disciplines into the fold to benefit the whole organization. So along with the documentation site, we also include light in Figma documentation. We have relevant onboarding information on how to use the library and how to contribute. We have some technical guidance specific to the Figma components, and an info sheet to detail design rationale and specific behaviors or component architecture. So this is for general knowledge transfer and to situate a new designer into the system. We also consider that future Figma updates might affect the way we've actually built things. So this is a way to kind of note down the decisions that were made at the time to make updating in the future easier. So on our documentation site, we use stories, which are live component demos that can be interacted with, but we sometimes actually need static assets as well, like when we want to annotate a component or show variant states. So we also have a small system of guidelines and tools that are used to design and export assets for the document site when they're needed. So kind of just by developing an accessible process around documentation, our aim and hope is to encourage contributions and ownership from all the different teams and regions connected to the PUMA organization. So I'll just hand over to Apostolos now to talk a bit more about our documentation site.
All right, thank you, Lexa. So in this part of the talk, we would like to talk a little bit about Sanity and specifically share some of the CMS recipes that we're working with to build an online documentation for our design guidelines and component library. Our objective for this project is to build more than a documentation, is to actually establish the foundations for a platform that can grow with the organization and the design system team as we learn more and tackle more interesting challenges. We want to build a platform with a low entry barrier that allows both technical and non-technical users to collaborate and contribute to the documentation. But we want to achieve all of that without sacrificing creativity, expressiveness, interactivity, or developer workflow. So in our limited time, we'll talk about two interesting challenges we're trying to solve: how we create content and how we organize it. So it's unusual, but we'll talk mostly about the backend. And we think that's interesting and worth talking even on a design conference, because content management is an important part of any software, and indeed the design system documentation too. It is the user interface that drives the content, and of course suffers from the same user experience issues. However, this part of our code is most often left completely to developers, and it's made to feel like you're editing a database. Like every content management system, Sanity CMS also comes with a dashboard. But what Sanity does very well is it allows us to customize our dashboard to represent a familiar and meaningful practical structure that's familiar yet decoupled from the presentation context. For our use case, we're going to separate our documents in multiple branches. We have design guidelines, web component documentation, a fonts package, an icons package, and more coming our way. Each branch is represented by a tree structure that provides us with an intuitive UI to reorganize documents, a quick overview of the relationship between documents, and the order and position in the navigation menu. To manage our content efficiently, we created a library that contains live demos, images, code samples, and technical blocks of content that we can then use to compose our pages. In our library, we have an elements section that includes all the primitive components, buttons, form inputs, and more. We have a pattern section for composite components and marketing, and a section for design foundations, color, typography, and layout. Furthermore, all our content assets in our library are nested under a parent package. A package can be as simple as a semantic group of content, but it may represent a UI component with a component status, version number, which is generated and updated programmatically through our continuous integration pipeline. Also, in our package, we store Figma links to direct easily to Figma and other useful references like YR authoring practices and design patterns. So next, let's talk about content and how we use our structured data and library packages to create a page. A page is our primary host of content. When we create a page, we start with a title, a page slug, some intro text, and then we're using a simple markdown editor with a preview to create text blocks that are related and in line only to that page. But what's interesting is that we can also associate a page with a package from our library and then choose to render information from a package, like the version number, links to Figma frames, and so on. But also, we can use this information to create cross-navigation links to other pages that are similarly associated with the package. Besides text, the most common content asset is the images. We provide methods to insert images inline to a document and within the Markdown editor, but our preferred method is to create a library asset and then import it to a page. In the image asset, authors are allowed to add one or more images with all the information needed, alternate text, and so on, and then configure the component to arrange the grid layout and other visual properties. Next, perhaps the most important library asset we have to show you is a story. Stories are basically component demos that can be imported to a page just as you would import an image. And indeed, our goal is to use stories in most places where we would normally use an image. To make stories editable, we created a basic coding environment in Sanity, where we can write and preview React code, render custom and interactive examples using the same code and the same components we will use in production. Obviously, we don't expect non-technical people and non-developers to write the code themselves. That's a very divisive subject. Stories are actually created by the developers as part of our normal workflow. But perhaps with some good documentation, some practice, and help from the developer team, some people may be able to change some text or combine code from multiple stories and make them their own. Finally, without getting even deeper in technical subjects, that's already way too much technical information for a design conference, we just want to mention that we have a few more types of library assets specifically targeted for developer documentation. We have a highlighted code sample built actually with an open source library maintained by our team at Formidable, and it's called React Live. And we have 3 distinct technical tables for component properties, ARIA reference, and keyboard navigation patterns. So this is all the CMS recipes we have for you today. Hope you find it interesting and maybe it sparks some joy. Having worked personally as an individual contributor and collectively as a team with Sanity CMS, both on the .com platform and most recently on the design system project, it has been nothing but a great experience. We think we're on a good path and confident that we'll be able to achieve everything that comes our way. Building this platform is extremely important to the success of our design system. Our ambition and vision for this platform is a source of truth, but also a communication hub, where over the next several years, hundreds, if not thousands of UX designers, brand designers, content authors, and software engineers all over the world will come together, share their practices and knowledge, and represent the PUMA brand. And with that, I'll hand it back to Stuart for the closing remarks.
Awesome. Thanks, Talis. So that's so far where we've traveled on this journey. Our small and agile team has had the playground space to go in and experiment, iterate, make lots of mistakes. We've built a flexible foundation that can be molded and scaled as necessary. So where are we going next? What are we doing with the design system? In our pipeline, we've got a ton of things going on. Lots of aspirational areas to kind of go and explore. So we're looking at creating some custom plugins to extend our workflow, layering in patterns and templates for our shopping app and for our in-store digital experiences. We're building out our contribution model, figuring out how do we get new designs and new code into the system. We're creating more documentation for developers and designers, specifically around onboarding. We're spending a lot of time thinking about what are small digestible video snippets that we can include to kind of create a soft landing for folks as they come into the system. And we're also looking at hiring content designers to help kind of build out the documentation space. This is hard, heavy work, and we want to make sure we've got the right experts in the space. I also want to give a quick shout out to the larger open source community. Our team of design system members is a small group. There's only 5 of us. With that said, we've got the support of over 130 designers and developers from the Formidable side of things, who were able to throw ideas towards, pick their brain, kind of get best practices and insights, redirect as needed. But we really rely heavily on the hundreds of open source libraries across the internet and the countless contributors who contribute to those libraries. As well as the design space, the Figma community has been integral to creating the patterns and structure within inside of our UI library in Figma. Without them, none of this would have been possible. So kind of in closing, our solution might not be the best fit for everyone, but this is the right fit for our team and kind of how this works, a custom solution. But if there's one thing to take away, it's really the importance of documentation. Make sure that you start early, document at each step, and throughout the entire journey. The thinking in the process is so important, and then being able to have that knowledge transfer and kind of housed in one spot, we found great success in that. So thanks to everybody. Thanks for coming out. If you're interested in hearing more about the work that we're doing or just want to say hi, feel free to reach out to us. So thanks very much.